Well, hey guys, it's Dr. Drake 63 here today, and thank you for joining me. You know, last fall, actually last summer, I picked up this beautiful pre-1964 Winchester 70 in 30-06, and pre-1964 as in 1959, according to the serial number. Now, at the time that I picked it up, I had heard for a long time if you're going to get a Winchester Model 70, you want to get a pre-64 because they're so much better. And I can attest to the fact that when you properly adjust the action screws and do the normal things you do to make sure your rifle's accurate, that this is as accurate as any hunting rifle I've ever shot. In fact, it was able to produce less than half-inch groups off a rest at 100 yards. So can't really ask for much more of a hunting rifle than that, right? Well, there's more than accuracy that goes into a hunting rifle. It also has to be something that's durable and it's going to last. And I'll give you an example. You've seen this on my channel several times. This is 2013 Remington 783. Now, these can be had for as little on sale. I've seen them for $275 without a scope. And I can also shoot half-inch or less groups off the bench at 100 yards with this rifle. So maybe the conclusion can be made that this is every bit as good as that Winchester 70, and it's not. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But why exactly do we see so much said about pre-64 Winchesters? And it's not just the Model 70, it's also the 94 lever action. You want to get a pre-64, they're worth more. Well, why is that? I wanted to do some investigation into that and do some research and kind of point out some of the things that make these pre-64 Winchesters a lot more valuable. And today we're just going to talk about the Model 70, as I don't have a pre-64 Winchester Model 94. It needs to be noted too that oftentimes you'll just hear from guys, well, they just don't make them like they used to, and back in the good old days with hand-fitted parts and things like that, everything was better. Well, in a lot of cases that's true, but it's not necessarily true. What I mean by that is a lot of the reason that you had so many hand-fitted parts back in those good old days was because you didn't have today's advances in computer-aided design and manufacture that you do in today's world. The tooling with CNC, some of the things that can be done with investment casting, certainly Ruger has proven can make a very fine firearm. So older isn't necessarily better, but pre-64 Winchester versus thereafter, there are a lot of differences, and we're going to get into those. One thing I wanted to note too, there's also, whenever you scour the internet looking for information, you see all sorts of stuff. I think the best one I saw was there was a fire at the Winchester factory in 1964, and they weren't ever able to retool to the prior standards. I don't know if there was ever a fire there, but the decision was made to find ways to make the Winchester Model 70 cheaper, because hand-fitted parts, having a lot of forged and heavy mill operations on receivers and things of that nature cost a lot of money, and they were labor intensive. And as wages went up, the amount of time it took, all of those things added into Winchester needing to be able to make a rifle that could keep up with the Remington Model 700. So the 700 came out, it used a lot of newer advances in technology, had a lot simpler bolt. We'll talk about that a little bit. So hope you'll enjoy today as I discuss what makes a pre-64 Winchester a pre-64 Winchester. Stay tuned. So the first thing I'm going to show you, I've got a couple bolts lying on this table. This one is from that pre-64 Winchester, and you see here also I have one from the Remington 783. And just taking a real quick look at them, you can see that there's some pretty big differences going on right here. What are those differences? Well, the Winchester modeled itself after the Mauser K98, which featured this type of large extractor claw. And as you can see, it moves as it goes into battery and comes out. And if you look real close, you'll see that's a rather sizable type extractor claw. This is what's known as a controlled feed type of system. And what that means is as you advance the bolt forward, that claw captures the rim of your cartridge. So it's under control of this bolt. You can see, by the way, that this has the serial number engraved into the bolt, which was just part of the whole hand fitting and matching process. What this meant is that you had a much more positive connection between the bolt and your round than a push feed. Now, how does a push feed work? Well, this certainly isn't the best example, but it's an example of a push feed type bolt system whereby the round is pushed forward but is not captured by the extractor until it goes to battery. You've got a very small extractor if you look at it here, comparatively speaking, and it's integral to the bolt itself. It's not a part that slides around the bolt as we showed you with this model right here. Okay. So the push feed mechanism basically advances forward your round out of the magazine as it comes up, grabs it after it's been fired, and then here's your ejector right here, which is a little spring-loaded pin. Other than that, it's a pretty simple process. Now, a Remington 700's got a much nicer overall bolt. This being about as cheap as you can get, where you have a forged bolt head, which snaps into a tube, not even a solid piece of metal. And it does what a push feed type of mechanism will do, and that's very popular. And that's one thing that Winchester quit doing after 1964, was making this kind of bolt and going to a bolt that was on a push feed system. Where's that going to come into play? Well, you're going to have 100% cycling when you use this type of system. And that's what Mausers and these Winchester 70s and even earlier models of the Winchester prescribed to. Now, Ruger in the M77 has a bolt that's somewhat similar to this, but it's not quite as much of a positive grab. So when people talk about, well, they want to build a rifle around a Winchester 70 action, one of the things they're talking about, of course, is using this type of bolt, which is a controlled feed, which means that you're going to always be able to eject around no matter how fast you cycle, no matter how many times you cycle. Now, how does this affect accuracy? Probably not a whole lot. Here you have two lugs that are going to lock into place. And here you have two lugs that are going to lock into place. So not a real big difference in what's going on there. Not a real big difference. The difference is how it extracts. This rotates. Whereas, as I showed you, this has a spring-loaded extractor right there. Okay. Apologize for the clanking. So really, your accuracy is not going to be affected, but your feeding will. How quick you can cycle a bolt, things of that nature. Winchester found that this type of bolt with so many moving parts that were hand fitted was just a heck of a lot more expensive to make than something like this, whether it happened to be a solid piece there for the bolt itself, or something even simpler like this with you see in many of today's budget rifles. So that's one big change. Winchester just stopped doing this. I'll show you something else here. You're looking at the follower on the magazine and the feed lips on the Winchester. This is a forged piece of steel that was milled per caliber. So in other words, if you had a 30-06 Winchester, it was made specifically for that. If you had a 270 Winchester, which is the same parent case with a smaller projectile, then they would mill something different for that. That's an expensive process. A lot of today's rifles, and even looking here at the magazine of the 783, you're going to see that this is actually a piece of plastic. In a lot of cases, it's plastic or aluminum. And you'll even see here on this particular magazine that it's a 783 long action. So that means your rounds like 270, 30-06, it's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So if you have a 308 or a 243, it's going to be a different magazine. So your feed system just isn't as exact or precise in a lot of today's modern rifles. And that also goes for the Winchester starting in the 1964 and beyond range. I want to show you something a little bit more detailed about that feed system. So the way this works is right about here, this bolt comes into contact with the rear of the bullet, and as I mentioned, this oversized extractor claw actually grabs hold of it on the way forward. So that bullet is under control from the back of the magazine all the way in to the breech. You lock it down, and when you bring it back, like I said, your ejector is the rotation of that claw. And that's, again, the definition of a controlled feed. Looking now at a push feed type style, your ammunition, which I'm not going to fool around with a loaded rifle, obviously, but your ammunition is pushed forward by the bolt. It's not grabbing it or anything, it's just pushing it. Which means that if you're at an angle or if gravity's coming into play, that round could actually come out of battery or come out of the ejection port right there. But as you see, as you move forward, only right now is that round been captured by the bolt with that smaller extraction mechanism. And because the extractor claw is so much smaller, it's a lot easier on a quick cycle for it just to skip altogether. I've had it happen on push feed rifles, Remington 700s and so forth in the past. So again, that's a reason why a lot of guys want to build a rifle. Even if they're not going for a full pre-64 Winchester, they'll build just off the action. Another thing I want to show you that they stopped doing after 1963 going into 64 was the safety was changed. Right here, so you can have it all the way in the back position, and it doesn't allow you to move the bolt or pull the trigger. Or you can move this to an intermediate position, which allows you to cycle the round, but you still are in safety. You're not going to be able to pull the trigger. All the way forward, then you can pull the trigger. That's a 3-position safety. Again, more expensive to make. What's the big advantage there? Some guys want to be able to have that feature of not having the bolt come loose at all, to have the bolt locked down in a true safety mode. 2-position safety works like this. It's in the off position, but you can still move that bolt. Why is that a problem? Well, if you're hunting on horseback or you're fooling around getting your rifle and that bolt comes up, you might have a problem. You're not ready to fire at that point. You have to go into your fire position in order to discharge your weapon. Is that a problem that you need a solution for? Well, the folks at Winchester didn't think so. But it is nice to have if you want your bolt to be secure, no matter what. You've got that option. You flip your safety forward and you're ready to go. The steel floor plate on the pre-64s were a lot more sturdy than you saw on later models. I don't know how many of you guys have seen floor plates on hunting rifles and seen how easy it is to get them open. Well, you fire a 30-06 round with some recoil. There's been cases when someone's either cycling the bolt or just the act of firing it causes this trap door to open. Well, this is not easy at all. You really got to give it quite a bit of help to get that trap door open. Now, I actually did have someone make the comment to me that a stiff trap door for opening would be an issue because what if you wanted to reload? Think about that for a minute, right? Anyway, just another change from old to new. Better? Yeah, in my opinion, having a harder trap door to get open is a bigger deal, because the only reason you're opening it is because you're done with your hunt and you want to take the ammo out of your magazine for the day, and you don't want to have to cycle each round out. I get that. Here's something you don't see on a lot of modern rifles. This front sight post is actually part of the barrel. It doesn't screw on or anything of that nature. Rather, it is a milled piece of steel, part of the making of this barrel. The reason for that was just to make sure that that was going to be as secure and integral as you can get. Now, the downside to that is it'd be a lot harder to change sights. But that's a difference from the pre-64s that you just don't see in rifles since then. And actually, a lot of modern hunting rifles like this Remington 783 don't even have a front sight option. They just figure you're only going to use it with a scope, so what do you need that for? Another way you can tell a pre-64 from later versions is this bump right here. You can see your rear sight rests on it, but the main reason is this is actually a lug that's built into the barrel, and underneath is a place to screw your stock in an additional time. Now, this is a custom stock. It did not incorporate that feature. In other words, the decision was made to just bed that particular lug as opposed to having it attached to the front of the stock. I'm not convinced, in terms of what we know about floating barrels and things of that nature, that that's a necessary feature or that it adds to accuracy, but it's something that was a feature of the pre-64 that you don't see later. The receiver was one solid heavy piece of milled steel that had a lot of different operations on it. You can even see the care that went in to the bolt handle. All of this stuff was machined with a lot of precision, and a lot of care went into it. Now, this stock we've talked about before. This is California Claro. It's a custom stock from Bishop from back in the day, and I think it's beautiful. Some people tell me that it detracts from the collector's value of the gun, and my comment on that is, I don't care. It's a beautiful firearm, and I love it, and it feels great in hand. But for those of you that are just purists in this regard, you want to get a pre-64 stock that follows the complete originality of coming from the factory. Now, they did make a number of stocks from the factory that had custom stocks. I don't know the history on this one, but I know that the detail on it, the craftsmanship, all very, very nice. Very nice. Now, as I mentioned before, there's not a big difference in off-the-bench accuracy to 100 yards between this rifle and this rifle. I would have to say the Winchester's a little bit smoother than this Remington 783, and this is kind of a pretty wide contrast between an older hand-fitted hunting rifle from 50, 60 years ago versus the way we make things today. This would be a lot more like a Glock. And if you've watched my videos, you know that I think Glocks are great tools. They just aren't very much to look at, in my opinion. So to say that that Winchester pre-64 is a better rifle than this, and yeah, in a lot of ways it is. It's just more solidly built. I believe it could probably take more of a beating and perform well. However, do I really want to take something like this out in bad weather or in terrain where I may find myself bumping into things? You know, that kind of scenario. So yes, more durable. Value-wise, yes, it's going to hold its value. I've had a number of people tell me, you shouldn't even shoot this rifle, man. You should just put it in a glass case or hang it on the wall. You don't want to take a chance at dinging it up. And my only response to that is, excuse me? I'm a hunter, and this is a wonderful hunting rifle. So yeah, if it is raining out and I'm doing my annual trip, which is typically in Montana, hunt muleys, nothing balances better than this. I've got a fixed 6-power Weaver scope from the old days on it, and that functions beautifully as well. But at the same point in time, if it's an overcast, gray, rainy day, I'm probably feeling a lot better about taking something like this out. And there's a big gap in between these, right? As you know, I've owned and reviewed Remington 700s. I think they're great rifles, but in terms of accuracy and things like that, that's one measure of a great hunting rifle. And I'd have to say that today's budget rifles most definitely do hold a candle to the older stuff in terms of that measure. It's important to note that the famous Marine Corps sniper Carlos Hathcock, who made his name in Vietnam, confirming well over 100 kills, including taking out a North Vietnamese general in his base camp. From what I understand, Carlos Hathcock went directly to Winchester and asked them to continue making the pre-64 version. They said no thank you, and Remington was more than happy to work with the Marine Corps and the U.S. military in developing the next generation of sniper rifle, and that's when they went to a version of the Remington 700. Was it a better choice? Not according to your best sniper at the time, but Winchester was looking at their financials and decided that to retool, to continue to make things in a tradition in which they had recently abandoned for cost measures, that it didn't make a lot of sense given the number of units that would be sold. But yes, this is the preferred weapon of Carlos Hathcock in the Vietnam era conflicts, and he of course had a different style scope on it. But known for accuracy, known for retained value. I think one of the biggest things with anything, whether it's rifles or cars or anything else, if they stop making them the way they used to and you can't get them new anymore, then all of a sudden you see an increase in value. And I think that has as much to do with the legend of the pre-64 Winchesters as anything. Although, as we found out today, there are some specific differences, and it's really a question of the individual's judgment whether or not those differences are important to them or not. Now, in terms of controlled feeding, if I think I'm going to be taking a lot of repeat shots, more than likely I'm going to grab something like that Browning BAR I showed you here recently on the channel, or something of that nature. But in the bolt action world, a lot of people have said this is the rifleman's rifle. This is the best American rifle ever produced. Some say better than anything in Europe, and I know there's a lot of guys that are a lot more into hunting rifles than I am that are going to start throwing names at you of this model or that model that's better for this reason or that reason. But mostly today wanted to talk about what was the big deal with the Winchester 64, pre-64 I should say. Now we know. And I really want to thank you for watching the channel today. As always, this is Dr. Drake 63 saying, carry on, guys.